But now I'm also studying you know where I am.
I mean, like, because I just really kind of like
It doesn't look nice. It feels very. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And you wrote something in the email also, but I don't ready to do that. Yeah. Really care of me.
Ma hiljem avastasin, et mainisin kõik kuigi küsimused olid hoopis midagi muud. Jutu ajada, nagu ta lihtsalt võin ära rääkida.
This, I mean, I want to later tonight. I don't know. And I don't know. I see what you mean. Well, I think, I mean, I remember my students. Sometimes you don't understand what it is. Sometimes maybe not the person or being inspired by the I don't know. Yeah, I get inspired.
Aga kaitsta natuke. Või noh, mitte kaitsta, aga ma sain öelda.
I feel very double. It's also
This is also...
some years ago. For the lecturer, it's great, but I think for a lecturer, I mean, lecturer, it's but I also understand ask for the version. Has to be a version that you can do that in your page. But they watch it, or because yeah, we did some last week.
Jala 2-3.
I'm not sure how it's going to be.
Seda semestri lõppu. Nad olid väga suure vahega. Yeah.
Oh yeah, because you trying to see like how to get the most of the it's working. Yeah, but the version is like we should use restrict or like only here now. Even the empty lecture hall collection. That was also funny. It's gonna say a few words about that. But you don't have to.
Okay, are we ready? It's nice to see you all after 1.5 year break. So let's celebrate physical lecture series again. And I'm very glad to see you all here. My name is still Andres Ojari. Even after 1.5 years, I'm a Dean of the Faculty of Architecture of Estonian Academy of Arts. And I'm really happy to welcome you to the first lecture of this year Open Lecture Series, which is organized by our faculty and which is supported by the Cultural Endowment of Estonia. And especially today's lecture is part of the Future Architecture Platform 2021. Future Architecture is the first pan-European platform of architecture museums, festivals and producers, which brings ideas on the future of cities and architecture closer to the wider public. And it's funded by the European Union Creative Europe program. And this year is actually 9th season to organize Open Lecture Series already. This is the lecture series where architects, urbanists, both practicing as well academics, introduce their work and field of research to the audience in Tallinn in our academy. And two guys, Sille Pihlak and Johan Tali, are curators of this year's lecture series, as previous one as well. And I would like to thank them for their fantastic work with the big applause. So thank you, Sille. And greetings to Johan, who is unfortunately at the hospital, but luckily everything is okay. So, Sille, I would like to invite you to open up this semester lecture series and explain a bit what you have done with Johan.
Johan is healing. He's getting better. Thank you all for being here in physical and in digital ways. I wanted to just have a short introduction to this semester topic. And I think just to start with why we are again here in this form of holding the open lecture series, I think I should start with the usual question of PC users. Should you hibernate? Should you shut down? Or should you restart your computer? And I think as a curator, we had similar discussions constantly. Should we try to keep it in the same way how it was? Should we just stop it at all? Because it might not make sense anymore nowadays to hold a lecture series with an international guest. Or does it make sense to restart with a new, a bit different way to avoid and prevent the memory leaks. So I think what this semester would like to look at is a topic of healing architecture, and healing architecture in both ways. On one way, looking at how architecture could restore us, the users, the inhabitants, and how it could help us to live in a higher quality. And in another way, how we as architects or people who are creating the space could heal the world of construction. So for that reason, I've invited this semester young, extremely promising emerging architects and practitioners, theoreticians, who would deal with topics of healing architecture. And this would range from today's architherapy towards the Soviet sanatorium culture, the next lecture, going into social housing topics and re-alphabetizing the grammar of architecture as it is. So I think there will be a lot of interesting things coming up, and I hope to see you all in this space and have a one-on-one with the lecturer. And I wish for this semester to have a lot of questions after the lecture. So thank you all, and I will give word back to Andres.
Thank you, Silla. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our first lecturer, talking about healing, Erika Henriksson. Erika is a building architect and practice-based researcher working in an intersection between architecture, craft, and art. Her field is alternate practices of architecture, and recurring themes in her work are social and material relations, ethics of care, and ways of spatially engage with speculation of life itself. Through an alternate practice of architecture influenced by feminist ethics and values. She works in performative and exploratory manners that combine hands-on making with relational and collaborative processes that often emanate from personal and intimate relations to people, places, and materials. During the lecture, Erika will presenting the practice and concept of Archetherapy, as you see already on the screen, which been given form through a 4-year-long explorative and performative process of transforming an old and abandoned building standing next to a rehabilitation clinic in a small rural locality called rvso in Sweden. At the moment, Erika is finalising her practice-based PhD-thesis in Trondheim, in Norway, and the topic is performing Archetherapy about crafting a building practice for the caring relations. Please join me welcoming Erika Henriksson.
Thank you. And thank you, Silla and Trine and everybody for inviting me. I feel so welcomed and well taken care of. It's really a pleasure to be here. I have seen very beautiful things in your city today. So today I will present Archetherapy. And Archetherapy is an approach to spatial making that's been taking form through the transformation of a building, the building you see here. And this building is standing in a rural locality in Sweden, next to a rehabilitation clinic. And the project started as a collaboration between me and 2 residents at the clinic. And throughout the whole process of transforming this clinic, there's been a constant interaction between me and the clinic, and primarily with me and different patients that's been part in the building process. And I should, you already said, but I should maybe say that this is the project that's been kind of forming my practice-based PhD that is called Performing Architherapy. And it's been, did I say? I need to, because sometimes there are so many information. I also want to say that if there is so many informations about this project, so if there is something that you kind of feel that should be cleared out, don't hesitate to ask a question while presenting. Otherwise, we can take it afterwards, but I really, if it's something that's kind of stopping you from understanding what I'm presenting, just ask. But this project's been spanning for 4 years, from 2014 until 2015 until 2018. And it's been carried out by me being present in the locality of the building and developing the project by being on site. So what I will present today is, do you hear me? It's now I heard myself better now. So what I will present today is basically a building project, but it's a building project that at the same time been forming this practice named Archetherapy. So it's a process of thinking through action, where the method of transforming the building been mine and my collaborators' main method of making and reflecting on what Archetherapy is. And I often define the project as explorative, performative, and relational. And for me, explorative in this project means that it's been an open process. So it started with a meeting between me and some people and a building. And from then on, everything has been taking form along the course of the work. And it has not had any clients or expected outcomes, and it's not been performed or carried out by using drawings or moving towards a preset goal. It's been this idea of architherapy that's been forming it, and it's been explored through this transformation of the building. And performative means that the ideas and visions that ideas and visions has been tried out by acting them out. So there was this beginning of a vision of architherapy, and this been explored not through theory, but for performing the ideas that we had for what it could be. So it's the same thing as this, the building method. The method of building has been the main method of exploring, if it makes sense. And then the third term is relational, and this is kind of the core of all my projects. And for this project it's been a relational project in the way that it's been driving forward through collaborations and participations, but it's been me who've been in charge of it. So it primarily kind of, the main locus of the project emerged from my relationship to people, to the place, to materials, and the idea of the relationship between everything that is part of a building project. It has been driving the interest of this project. So exploring the relationship to materials, exploring relationships to people, exploring your own relationship to the process. And my intention with this presentation today is not to kind of tell what Archetherapy is, but to show it through the presentation of this project. So through taking you through the course of its development and then moving a little in and out of it, showing you what it is. So, as I said, the project started as a collaboration between me and 2 residents at the rehabilitation clinic. And these are the 2 of them, Hans and Kim. And we got in contact while they were staying at this rehabilitation clinic. And they were very kind of disappointed with the form of therapy that they were offered. They were giving somewhere to stay, they were getting medicine, they were giving food, but they were lacking something meaningful to do while staying there. So the 2 of them found each other and started to go on walks and started to discuss their situation. They started to discuss therapy in general. And during this time, they also found this building and started to nourish an interest of doing something with it and transforming it as this something meaningful to do. They were very kind of disappointed with the care system they were in. And it was they also felt very kind of cut off from society. So they were in a position where they were supposed to get well and get back to society, but they had no link to it. So this was some of the motivations for them of starting to think of building as therapy. And this building that you see, that is the kind of main building for the whole project, it's a previous mortuary. So it's a building where they store dead bodies. Because the clinic where Hans and Kim were staying was built in the beginning of 1900s as a clinic for leprosy. So then they needed somewhere to store the dead bodies. There was a lot of people dying there. And when during the winter, when the ground was hard, they couldn't bury the bodies in the ground, so they needed somewhere to keep them. And then the clinic, or the leprosy clinic, shut down while leprosy was disappearing from the area, and then it transformed into a mental institution, and then later on to a rehabilitation clinic. And when the leprosy clinic closed down, this building was left empty. So when they found it, it had been standing empty for like 60 years or something. And they found it. So they found this building having this beautiful ideas of building as therapy, and they also got very inspired by its previous use. When I met them for the first time, they were saying, maybe something that looks old or drudgery from the outside could be added with life. You could add something beautiful to it. And maybe people visiting this building could then see that something that looks out from the inside still can be beautiful inside. So they immediately engaged in this building as a way of thinking. And I got them to know about their ideas because I was friends with the guys. It's two people, the older guys, with his son. I had never met him, but he told me about his father being at the clinic and finding this building. And I was very inspired by this way of engaging in what it could mean to build. So I took contact with them and wondered if they wanted an architect in their group. And they replied, and I went there to see them, and the three of us formed a team. So this is kind of the beginning of the project. Yeah, I should maybe also say that, so the work between, the project was spanning for 4 years. And during the first half year of the project was an intense work between the three of us. And it was during this time where the kind of framework for the whole project and the idea of Archetherapy was set. And this is why I always feel like I mean, as you hear, they were the one who found the building and had this idea, so they need to be mentioned as like creators of this practice. But they weren't part of the project during the whole process. They left the clinic at different phases. So the work has been spanning for 4 years. The first half year, we were all three of us. Then we were two. And then later on, there was like a framework for an engagement in building. And then different patients at the clinic were joining in and out of the process. And it was run by me. But it was during this first half year that kind of the main framework and premises were set. Yeah, and then I thought I should say something about the clinic because usually, and my relationship to it, because usually this is a question that comes up. So here in the picture you see the yellow building on the right side is the rehabilitation clinic, and then on the other side of the road is this building that we've been transforming. So it's a little separated from the clinic area, which I think was but very close, which I think was something good because people from the clinic was coming over and joining, but it was still kind of leaving, you know, where they were living in a way. And it's a rehabilitation clinic that is called Rehabilitation Clinic for People with Comorbidity and or mental disabilities. And this means that it's people having often drug-related problem combined with a mental disease that often influence each other negatively. So often both of them influencing each other at the same time, but it could be also either or. And people staying there were coming from all over Sweden, primarily Stockholm. and they were staying there from a day to a week until several years. So some people were coming there, staying for a couple of months, and then leaving. And there was, during the time that I was there was one guy who had lived there for 9 years. So it was a very kind of varied group of people, age, and everything. And there was no kind of official collaboration between me and this clinic. So I joined by getting in contact with Hans and Kim, the 2 residents, and we formed a project that we presented to the clinic and asked if they would be okay with me coming and working with their patients, and they were okay with this. But there was not this kind of, top-down or official collaboration. They have also not like financially funded anything of the project, and have not been like involved in outcomes of my way of working or anything like this. So, I mean, and I think it's important to say, like, both to know kind of how I was working and that there wasn't, I mean, it was for good and bad, but I think that it was good that there hasn't been any financial support, because then it would also have been expectations of outcomes. It's been a very kind of free project. But at the same time, I have been using their workshop. I got the clinic is run by one company that is like a health company, and then there is a real estate company owning the buildings. And I asked for permission from this real estate company to transform the building, and this was okay. And I have also had permission to use their workshop and magazine facilities. And while I was there working, I was eating lunch and dinner at the clinic every day. So I was a kind of natural person at this clinic. When people from outside came, they said, and this is our architect. So it was something that happened like, simultaneously, but after some time I found myself like being the clinic architect, which also I see this project's been an exploration in, like what happens if you start up a project in next to a rehabilitation clinic, like engaging with it, both like for me, like how I have learned things about people's lives and situations, and also like what I can give to the clinic. And I should also say that this thing of me eating lunch and dinner there every day was, I mean, it was great for me for like running the project, not having to think about it, but it was also a way of having this kind of natural contact with the clinic. So I always knew when there was somebody new coming, and I could invite them to participate if they wanted to. And this is how, I mean, after my first collaborators left, I decided that I couldn't make it my kind of task to involve everybody at the clinic, because people were in so many different situations. So it was more about informing, inviting, trying to create an atmosphere where people would like to join, but I haven't had the expectations that there always would be somebody from the clinic working with me, because of the condition it wouldn't be possible. This is a picture of me eating lunch with a friend that was there helping me. So this is how the cantina looks at the inside. So then going back to, or beginning to talk about the project. So this initial phase of working together was very much about then forming ideas of what we were going to do. So as I said, I took contact with them, there was this building, there was an idea of wanting to build as a kind of therapy, but that was it. The rest we had to kind of figure out ourselves. How should we build? What does this mean? How can we work together? And for me, it was very much about like also unlearning certain methods and way of working as an architect. It wasn't possible I think it would have been very exclusive to work with kind of abstractions, drawings. So from the beginning, we started to find a way of talking together and kind of search for how we could discuss architecture together. And we did that by going around in the surrounding landscape and talking kind of with what we saw, with materials, with spaces, with things, and having this kind of ongoing conversation where we could refer to things around us, which very much helped in creating kind of a common reference of what we meant when we were talking. And it was both about ideas of what this practice called architherapy could become, but it was also about just like materiality, space, like going to ruins, visiting different buildings, talking about heights, feelings of materialities, but doing it always like very concrete. And during this time, there was this different kind of premises. I don't think I mentioned them before, that Hans and Kim starting to voice, that was these things that there were things that they wanted to address towards the outside society that they felt was lacking. So while being in this clinic, they were in a way feeling disconnected, and maybe that they made some mistakes in lives, but at the same time they saw a society around them not functioning. And they were talking about that the contemporary society in Western world had lost connections to nature, lost relations to the soul, lost relations to old and new traces of time. So these was different things that they were saying, and that they felt that we should address through this project, and that this was how they saw a way of also discussing with society around that things that weren't working, that they wanted to kind of discuss through the process or through a building, which I found very inspiring. And this was an image, for example, so this way of talking with our surrounding or thinking with our surrounding. So they took me to the church and said that there was something, both of them were not religious, but they felt that there was something in that space that they were lacking in spaces and in society around them. So this was a way of kind of talking about lost connections to the soul through a space. And this was our beginning of starting to form the project together. And this was also, and while doing this, we were like simultaneously discussing what we would do with this old building, the mortuary, at the same time that it was this kind of big, high ideas of architherapy and lost relations to the soul. And it was about, and together they were kind of starting to become pieces that together form this idea of architherapy, which both concerns like visions and projections and speculations of something different. And that approach of thinking with the physical surrounding was also then taken into the process of transforming the building, which I will go into a little later. This is just one image from when we started to actually hands-on work with the building. So it was divided into 3 separating rooms. You see the closest one here, the floor has fallen down. And we landed on creating one big space instead of having 3 small ones. And there was also, I'm not sure if I said it before, I think I said it, that there was this idea of adding life to the inside. So there was a design decision of not touching the outside, not doing anything almost to the outside, but to only work with the inside and transform the interior room. And this is just like, this slide is, I wanted to, so it's been this kind of parallel process of it being a collaborative and participatory process at the same time as it's for me been a reflecting process of how I'm working and how I'm as the one kind of in charge of it is reflecting on what's happening. And for me, it has very much been about taking images of the process and using kind of everything that happens as a material to think with. Also, while being so kind of encaptured in a process, it can be really hard to see it from an outside. And for me, the visual materials have helped me to kind of see it a little more outside. I don't have to think of just about it, me being inside the process. I can see it just as an image saying something. And I don't know if this like comes through to you, but it's like, so for example, this image of like breaking out of a wall has also been like then starting up ideas of discussions of like breaking up, creating relations. So I've been kind of visually documenting the process and also documenting things happening and then categorizing them and starting to see like paths occurring or encounters or things that happens through the process that I see as kind of openers for new types of relations that can emerge in a building process, like if you pay attention to it. So like digging in the ground can be a way of starting to kind of explore the life of worms in the ground and building these kinds of relations to your surrounding world through the building process. And this is an image from the making of the foundation. And with this, I wanted to say that I, as much as possible, had tried to stay open for whatever could emerge of this project and its presence at this rehabilitation clinic. So there were not everybody that was interested in like the hands-on construction of the building, but there were people that wanted to participate in different ways, and I tried to kind of encourage this and just like let it happen. So, I mean, one of the reasons that this project was spanning for so many years and such a long time was because of allowing all these detours. And so this is, you see, and for example, there was a lot of people that wasn't kind of interested in the hands-on construction, but which was interested in discussing it or in following it or coming down and discussing with the others working. And then there were some others that, for example, Stefan here, which was a musician that was very kind of engaged in the process, but not by working. And he started to make a soundtrack of the building process. And from time to time, while we were working, we set up his piano in the room while he was having concerts, playing his soundtrack. So it became kind of an event, another something else happening. And this is again for me the way of the approach of working in this project, that I didn't want to kind of close down any possibilities, but allow whatever kind of emerged to happen and to encourage it, and then just like see what could be, yeah, what a building process could contain if you allow these things to take place. And then, like, so almost every step in the process of transforming this building, or each element, has also been, in a way, it's been an exploration in techniques, different ways of building, but also what each of these elements, what extra meaning could be extracted from each of these phases. So this is an image from the making of a new foundation where we built up new plinths. And while this was happening, there was also an ongoing conversation at the clinic about what is a good foundation in life. So sometimes a concrete element also became a metaphorical one. And I should also say that, so I said that nothing was kind of planned out beforehand, but there was one building technique that we will come to later that I decided on that we will use. And to be able, this was the walls that we were building up on the inside, and they would be very heavy. They were weighing around 12 tons, so we needed a new foundation. So this is why we were building up the plinths. We built 8 plinths and reinforced the cornerstones, and there was almost 1 day each for a plinth. So we were like building it, constructing it, and at the same time there was conversation going on about about foundations in life. And at the end of each day, we wrote something on the plinths that was kind of gathering these conversations. So on this one, it says här och nu in Swedish, which means here and now, where there was then a conversation of things that people felt were important or missing for having like a good life. So there was this, let's see, and this is another plinth by Stefan the musician, and this plinth is, this is a quote about believing in somebody else helping you that he wanted to add as an important foundation. So in this way, it was like, this is also what I meant with the process being an exploration. It was like seeing how we all differently were engaging in each phase, and then allowing these kind of side conversations or things discussed being part of the making process at the same time. And this is another example of this, where somebody had found a watch, and it led to a discussion of relations to time, and it became then a ritual in the making of one of the cornerstones. And this image I took in because it very clearly marks a kind of shift in the process. So again, this way of saying that I worked openly and not planned out, or I searched for a way of allowing, like constantly having a reflection of the process, and if the ideas we had of what we were doing really were in line with what we were aiming for. And this is from the beginning of making the plinths, we were buying the material at the hardware store, and during this project or this process, I discovered that this was one of the phases when a lot of the residents at the clinic were kind of cut out from the process. Sometimes some of them would join me to the hardware store, but they were always getting very nervous. It felt like they weren't, I were the one acting. I was like knowing what we needed. I was buying the materials. And at some moments it became also very stressful, and people felt that they were not, I think they felt that they weren't good enough or able to participate in the process. So then we shifted into, instead of buying the material, we were gathering it. So we started to go to the riverside and started to gather stones to use as construction materials instead of the leka blocks. And for me, this was like a way of like reflecting on this, both my power position and how I could let go of it and invite more people into the process. At the same time as there was this idea of architherapy as a way of also building up relations to the material world and to your surrounding world, and to go out and explore it as part of building. So this is from a process later on, and how we then, the gathering of materials became a way of making excursions and seeing different places. And it was also then possible for people staying at the clinic to contribute with materials and gather materials even if I weren't there, which was, I think, a very important part of it. And that also kind of, yeah, for me, this is like, I said that this project is part of my practice-based PhD, and this very much kind of shows my way of thinking through practice, to starting and using the making process as a reflective process. So engaging in a process, reflecting on it all the way, but then finding ways to change it when you see that things aren't working the way you were like intending to. And these are the kind of, yeah, this kind of marks my approach to practice-based research, I would say. And the next then element in the next phase in the work of transforming the building are the walls. And then we use this building technique called Cordwood Masonry. And this was the technique that was decided by me beforehand, or by me in discussion with one of my collaborators. So I actually didn't show you, I mean, this initial phase we were actually working also with making models, and we were designing an outcome of an idea of how to transform the building. But when we had reached that idea, we discovered that it would be very hard to execute it in a way where people could be part in the building process. So then we made a decision that we would be more about finding techniques of building where people would be able to be engaged and working towards a design outcome in a way that you have like a final solution of how to transform the building. And during that process, I found this building technique. And it's an ecological and low-impact building technique called Cordwood Masonry. It's built on a combination with untreated wood and clay mortar. So, and it's in the mortar you combine clay, sand, sawdust, and different kind of fibers for arming the mortar or holding it together. And it's a building technique that exists all over Europe and also in US, but it has always been kind of an alternative building technique, and it probably emerged sometime around 1900s during the time on industrialization and urbanization, when a lot of people were moving to cities and in need of cheap houses to live in. So then they started to kind of experiment with what they could use, and this was also a time when the sawmills were starting to, when the sawmills was kind of, what do you say, emerged or exist. So, because people, most likely this technique didn't exist. I mean, people have been building with wood and clay for thousands of years, but exactly this way of using wood as a bricks probably didn't exist before, because you need quite developed saws to be able to make so many cuts. And the technique was most very kind of common around this areas of sawmills, because workers from the sawmill could take offcuts from their work and use them as building material. And then you digged up clay from under the ground and combining them. And there were many different reasons why choosing this technique. One was that it's very kind of easy to learn, and it's very easy for inexperienced builders to build with it. It's also very kind of repetitive and easy, so you could both go into kind of thinking of the building process as kind of a rhythmic, nice way of working, or you could engage in patterns or expressions. But it was also chosen as a way of kind of build relations to the surrounding world, since almost all the material is gathered, so we could continue this approach of going around in the surrounding also when building by gathering materials. And then there was also, for me, it was also an interesting part with this thinking of architherapy that came from how it was, how the technique emerged. I mean, it did emerge out of a need and out of a necessity, but at the same time it shows a very creative way of using kind of scarce materials that is around you. And I had this idea that this is also something that maybe you could learn through the technique. So by engaging in building in this way, you also start to look at your surrounding differently, and you start to kind of reflect on which materials you use when you're building. So this is just a few images from working on the inside. And this is one. So this process of constructing the wall occurred between July and December 2017. And then I basically had like an open practice where people could drop in at different times and working. And some of the residents were working with me for weeks, coming every day. Some were like coming few days a week. Some came once and didn't come back. But it was this kind of walls under construction all the time, and people can just step into the room and join in. It's very kind of easy and intuitive. You see the buckets of mortar, and you see the wooden material, and you see the walls, and you can just engage in building. And I took a couple of courses before starting up this process and consulted an expert in this technique. And together with him, we landed on a thickness of the walls that would also make it possible to spread the loads in the thickness of the walls, which made it possible to work very freely. So they're 38 centimeters thick, the pieces, which gives room for a builder to add very thick layers of mortar and work very kind of freely. You don't have to think so structurally when building. And this was also kind of one of the ways of designing situations where people easily could engage in their work and in the process. So this is like an image of seeing how it looked like. So there were 8 different kind of frames, walls, that were then filled in and worked with during these months. And this is an image of the materials that are part in the construction of the walls, and which was also one of the aspects while I chose this technique, that it was possible to gather all the materials ourselves. We could either collect them raw from the area around us, or reuse from recycling stations or people living in the area that were giving away material. And this was both a way of, again, like creating situations for like experience your surrounding, creating relationships to your surrounding world, also for like the residents at the clinic that was very kind of closed off, to make this as excursions of going around and also getting to know both the area but also people living that became engaged in the project. So this image down there is a farmer living in the town that I got to know, that started to help out with giving his wind-fallen trees to the project. But it was also kind of a way of starting to think about the materials that we use when building and creating a relationship to them and starting to understand their process of coming together. And so like going to the forest and collecting sand raw is something different than buying the materials from the building store. Yeah, and this is kind of a similar story as the story of the foundation and the stones. This image was taken one day when I was visiting one of the residents that had left the clinic, but that I still had contact with. And he sometimes came back to work with the process, with the project from time to time. And one of the days when I was going to pick him up to come and work with us, he had then found materials himself that he wanted to gather or bring to the construction site. So again, this was a way of like seeing that it worked. This this kind of design of the way of building, which also made it possible for people to act and to feel that they can contribute, or like giving. It's been very much about like finding how to give people a chance to also contribute, and not just like set up the process so that everything is fixed and people can just come and participate and leave, but to see where you can create space where they can also kind of take actions themselves. Yeah, and another aspect of the technique of building was, there was this idea of building as therapy and setting up the structure so that people could participate. But another aspect of it was that it was possible to build very, very cheap or with very low cost, since I think, paid almost nothing for any of the materials. The clay was collected raw, the sand was given away by a farmer that owned the land where it was. Most of the wood was collected from a recycling station, or like here, from a guy living in the area. And for me, this was very kind of important to kind of tap into the local economy of the place where the project was developed. Both as it's always kind of a way of working for me, but it also is a way of kind of keep a kind of autonomy in the project, that you don't have to, if you don't have too high cost on the production, you can create a little more freedom, and you don't have. So for example, in this project, it felt very important to have the freedom for the project to take whichever course it took, and to really allow the context to influence the process. And if we would have had sponsors or money given from some organizations, then there might have been deadlines or expected outcomes, or we would have had to, show a goal that we were working towards. And for this process, we decided to take away all of that kind of restraints. And then engaging with the local economy was a way to make that possible. And this is one way of how that was working. So while working with the project, I was renting a cottage in the forest from this guy. We got to know each other quite well and started to trade services. So he was seeing very badly. He was almost blind, but was very kind of skilled with labor and had contacts with a lot of farmers and knew where to find materials. So he helped me with that, and in return I was driving him to the store, helping him shopping and doing certain things that he needed help with. So this is, for me, it hasn't just been about like building up a relationship to the clinic, it's been about building up a relationship to the whole area as a way of like carrying out the project, and also kind of to really make this project as like a meeting site between the clinic and the area around, or people living in the area around. To really, it felt very important to kind of allow the process to be at the center, and not the outcome. This is then moving into the floor of the building, of the transformation. And if the walls was then a technique that I had decided on beforehand starting to build, but the rest wasn't decided. And this was one of the materials and techniques that just occurred as part of being there and as part of working. So while gathering materials for the walls, during one of the excursions, we found this brick ruin where we started to kind of intuitively, or just like gathering bricks, not sure where to use it. And then after some times we decided, okay, this can be the material for the walls. So this was kind of how the context and how the process was kind of deciding the design, and how the possibility this was in the context decided how to build in a way. Yes, and this is also like just for me a nice experience or a nice story of this guy was staying at the clinic, and he joined the project when we were constructing the walls, and was kind of snake bit and was like, I'm joining this project. And then it was basically him and me who was making the floor. We were gathering materials together, and he was joining everyday building. And as I said earlier, there wasn't always people staying at the clinic that was part of the project. From sometimes I was working on my own, or people in the area around were joining the process. And then suddenly something like this guy appears, that he moved into the clinic, and he even had working clothes with him because he was hoping to get the chance of do some practical work. And he was very kind of interested in constructing work. So he was then first joining like few hours a day, and then longer and longer. And you could really kind of see how he grew by being part of this process, and also kind of discovering his competences or capabilities. So it was a very nice experience to see. But I want to kind of enforce that it hasn't been a process of trying to transform somebody else's life. This idea of architherapy came as designing an approach to building, and also came from the people that I was working with. And I haven't seen myself as like offering therapy for anybody. I've been like an architect, and an architect trying to design a building process that people can engage in. But it's been very nice to see that from time to time there are people that really like, for them it can be therapeutic to engage in building. And this is kind of another story of how a material or how a technique of making came into the process, like by chance, or through these different relations that emerged. And these are tiles that were given to the project by one of the residents at the clinic that was having them with him when he moved in. He had worked as a ceramics worker, and then kind of lived a quite rough life and lived on the street and moved around, but he was carrying with him a bag of tiles. And he had this idea that he would like, when he once had a home, he would use them there. So I invited him to join the project, and he came with these tiles and wondered if they could be part of the project. And then together with him, we started to set up a small tile production, thinking that this could be like another technique to explore. But unfortunately, he was leaving the clinic before we had gotten so far into it. We had just like starting to get the clay. So it's like a nice and a sad story in a way, but it's like showing how a technique and how a way of building, kind of how this way you're working. And still after he left, we carried on this small tile production and got help from a local artist, which allowed us to burn it at her studio. So we could I had, in a similar way as building up the walls, I set up a tile production inside the building, and then people were joining at different moments during the day. And we constructed tiles, and then we went to this woman's studio and burned them. Yeah, and let's see if this works. So we are moving towards the end. But I just wanted to kind of show, so I have tried to show how this way you're working with the process and adjusting to the process has been the way of building up this idea of what it could mean to build this therapy, or what architherapy could be. And it has partly been much about like building up a toolbox and building up a toolbox of techniques and ways of engaging in building. But at the same time, it has also been kind of a way of reflecting on the process and reflecting on the meanings of the process and forming a vocabulary for what we are doing. So, for example, architherapy, a combination of architecture and therapy. And this is another term that was kind of made during the project, which I have a small film from showing when this is explained by one of the participants. Let's see if it works.
Psykologi, materialpsykologi. Ja, på något sätt så här, istället för psykologi i hjärnan eller något annat så är det i material. Eller liksom det som är döda ting men som kan vara levande också. På något sätt, det blir levande i händerna liksom.
När man håller på.
Ja, och så i, i psyket själv. Det blir ju som en slags del av hjärnan på något sätt. Man håller på med någonting. Känner av stenarna, hur de kan sitta och på materialet, på murbruket och under murbruket och hur de sitter som kilar med på varandra. Kilar fast varandra.
Materialpsykologi.
Ja, eller hur? På döda ting, men som blir levande i dig liksom. Det blir ju, om du bygger en grund och så tänker du att du bygger en grund i dig själv också samtidigt. När du håller på att putsa där. Om du håller på att städa på ditt rum eller vad du än gör. Och ordnar upp saker. Så ordnar man ju upp det i huvudet samtidigt.
So for me this is a way of like showing also how I've been working, like how it's been this, how these excursions also been a way of like stopping up and reflecting on the process and using, I have used a lot of video material and photographic materials to kind of capture the process and capture reflections. But also it was a way of showing how this kind of engagement with the making of words has been part of kind of reflecting on the words and framing important things in the process. And also for me, like being in a research environment, it's been a way for trying to understand how it's possible to pack experience together in a concept or in a term that can also be kind of transferred to somebody else. So this is why I also both material psychology and architherapy, why I define this as both a practice and as a concept, because I think that it can be something, you know, it is starting to, I hope, for you been like an idea of what it is and something that you could discuss and that you could change and discuss further. And this has been kind of one of the things that I have also been searching for in this project, how the making of a project and the making of a building or the transformation or a building process at the same time is making of knowledge or visions or ideas, and how this at the same time could be transferred to others, or how a project can be the making of a strategy or an approach to making just as much as it is just the transformation of a building. And I think I'm ending there, actually. Yes. Oh, maybe you want to see, actually I forgot. Maybe you want to see, sorry, how do I find the, yes, now. And we can, sorry for saying it was over when it's not, but I just wanted to show kind of the room when it's transformed. Oh, thank you. This was too hard for me. So just some images so you see kind of how it looked like at the end. There you see the tiles that the guy added over the doors, and then the tiles that we made. So it's just like one big open room that is now left for people at the clinic to visit. And it's really been kind of, I see also the room almost as like a toolbox or as a tryout of techniques and ways of engaging in building. And it hasn't had this, one idea of also leaving it open was to leave it open for things to be added in it, or things that can be added later on. Yes. Do you have any? Yeah.
For the clinic?
I hope so. I mean, this is one of the sad things, or that also that there's been, so
I think that the staff been very kind of generous and nice, allowing me as a foreigner, not foreigner, but stranger, to just appear and getting the room there. But they haven't been so kind of engaged in it as a project or as in the outcome. There has been a lot of people staying at the clinic that's been invested in it and interested in it, but then it's this thing of people coming and going. So now there is almost nobody staying at the clinic that was part of the process.
But did you discuss it with the people you made it, what it would become?
Yeah, and I mean, everybody had different ideas. Some saw it as a studio, that they wanted to go there painting. Some said that he would go there reading. There was all these different ideas of what people would do there. But it is also, you could almost just see it as like an exhibition space. So, these walls, you can just sit and look at them. We made also a bigger opening. You see a kind of a hint of a window down towards the river where you can sit and look down at the river, and you can also kind of look at the walls. But it was also very intentionally that it doesn't have a clear program or a function, that it was really about the process.
Is there any interest from the side of psychologists, psychiatrics, tied to the rehabilitation center to further study, because maybe it offers a method for them?
Yeah, I honestly haven't presented it and I have always, maybe I should, but I have also been very kind of scared of going there, because I have been so afraid that people will understand me as somebody thinking that I'm coming and doing therapy or offering. I think this is far outside of my field. I have really engaged in this project as architect and as somebody interested in human relations and trying to see the people I work with and how to construct a process so that they can engage. But I have been kind of scared of going in that direction, but in a way it's very interesting, because of course it could be possible to, I think I could say that there was a lot of positive benefits from the people that participated in the process. But it's like with everything, if you're interested in it, then it really makes sense. So there was a lot of people. It's not like building is the solution for everybody, but it could be, and it could also be just this kind of activity, and I really saw this project as both terms. I saw, reflecting on myself of the first time when I stepped into the clinic, I was kind of very stiff and uncomfortable and didn't know how to behave. It was almost the first time I was inside that kind of institution. So it's also been kind of a journey for me of learning how to engage with people and to kind of stay open. There were so many prejudices from my side that I had to that were challenged, not that people that I thought maybe this person, you won't get so much contact, they will not be part of the project. And then after me being there for a long time, suddenly we were having long conversations together. So I feel like it really went both ways about as being working closely to a very kind of specific site, or what to say, or a specific type of environment.
Do you hope to sort of build up a methodology of this method of do you hope this to frame it somehow and put it out there so the others could try something similar, or is it something that could be processed and done only when either you or
No, I think that would be great. For me, this is also kind of the idea of spreading knowledge, or do it that others could take it up and do it into something else. Or you don't mean it like this?
Frame it then to the methodology as a sort of sequence of methods in order to reach this point, and how would you in which kind of format would you put it? Is it going to be a PhD or is it going to be a written text, or do you think it's more like videos, or what kind of form or matter it should have in order to pass forward this method?
I mean, this has been one of the challenges for me, really, because but like now I'm like finalising my PhD, which is basically from this project, and it's written in a way that it has like an introduction that is setting kind of the framework of the project and of the concepts, and both like architecturally but also kind of explaining the site. And then there is one part that I call unfolding along the way, which is basically short stories where I have written essays picking up of several situations, and how, like a little of how I explained it to you today, of how I've been thinking through the process of making and how certain moments been crucial for like developing the idea of architherapy. But it's almost more about developing the concept than saying like this is how it works. But the core of the whole research is really relational, and how to kind of put the relational interest prior to an outcome, and how to kind of make design decisions that is more defined by people being able to engage, or thinking of the meaning in building. So it really has been about like meaning and reflections of processes of making than working towards a set outcome. But this wasn't answering your question. Where was it?
Yeah, I am wondering that when you are designing something in a group, then it is easy that disagreements arise about which way to design something, which way to build something. Were you having such problems and how to solve it, or you were not leaving them enough freedom to have conflicts?
I mean, I think because this is also why I call the project both
Collaborative and participatory, because I think like the collaboration is what I see where there is like an interchange, like, or where there is kind of mutual exchange of ideas and similar kind of possibilities to act and decide. And then participation is a little more where people participate in the project but maybe isn't influencing it as much. And I would say that the framework of the project's been a collaboration when it really was about like designing and finding like the framework of what we were doing together. But then when constructing, it was more about, it wasn't like, hey, now we're going to have a meeting about this floor, you know. It was like we found these bricks, they were there for some time. It was me taking the final decision, but really based on reflecting on how I thought people would be able to engage. I mean, I even think that it would have been kind of irresponsible of me of leaving it open to people never designed or been involved in a building project before, also staying at a rehabilitation clinic to make these decisions. I kind of felt that I make these decisions, but I do them kind of really trying to allow people to take part.
Thank you for the lecture. Now I'm wondering, it is very obvious that the process of building was open, and then there were not many predefined decisions, or the decisions were made along the way. But I'm wondering, how did you embark on the whole thing when you got the phone call, or did you know then that it's going to be something that is kind of an experiment?
No. I mean, really none. I mean, it's also this thing that I thought of when I was looking at the presentation today.
What triggered you to?
I was in love with the project. It was like, it was just, there were so many kind of fascinating and attractive things with it. I mean, both this thing of I mean, meeting these two people that was having so interesting ideas of what it could mean to build, you know, I felt like I had much more interesting discussions with them about meanings in architecture than I had at like the architecture school. Like I felt like we connected, like it was really like a collaboration, or like we were sharing ideas. And for me, it also made sense of going out, thinking with the environment, or exploring, like looking at the building and talking about like design decisions instead of sitting in a studio space. So, but it was really something that grew, you know. First time you go there, you don't know what's going to happen, if it's going to be able for it to happen. And it was also a long time when he wasn't sure we would get permission to build. And, you know, there's been all these different bad things happening, or things that could jeopardize. Yeah.
I think you're either unconsciously or consciously in a dialogue here with this emerging ideological movement called Communism. Communism. It's basically very many post-Marxist, neo-Marxist theorists are all sort of actively supporting this movement, which is like sort of a counter-movement to capitalism that tends to turn everything into abstract notions. I mean, the very essence of capital is an abstract notion. And in architecture and constructing, you can also experience that mostly buildings are built by anonymous foreign labor, while you are sort of building, in that process, you're building a community and you're interacting with, as you mentioned, nature, materials. In the capitalist sort of pipeline, you know, that everything is abstract. Materials come from who knows where, being processed in a plant who knows where, and then end up in the building. The users of the building don't have a personal relationship with it. So it's everything opposite that.
Yeah, I mean, no, was it a question? No,
no, I was just reflecting.
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, I'm super glad you're saying it, because I mean, for me, it is super political project. I was reading Guattari's 3 Ecologies all the time, feeling that it's like made sense of what they were saying. But I have also kind of made a decision of like show, not tell, or that I haven't wanted to like. I felt like this could go through this describing it, but that it doesn't have. You don't have to use those words. Which been kind of a decision I took, that it's like it's about turning your back against certain things and not discuss them so much, but by doing it other, you still kind of, you know, it's there in a way.
Could I ask one question about, you're using the word project, and then at the same time you are talking about practice. So project is somehow, it's like moving from A to B, or to achieve something. And the practice is something which is constantly, you know, how to explain that? Something which has no end.
Yeah, yeah.
And I liked the end of your lecture, that you were struggling, should I show the final project?
Yeah, because of the
and my question is maybe about that, is it like some kind of constant, let's say, practice, or where is your next, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, it's because
next project, sorry. Is it somewhere there?
Yeah, I think this is interesting, because for me this was like, I mean, I see traces of things that I have done before, but for me this was also, I mean, also having the time to really kind of reflect on your work. This was when I kind of defined it as like a practice or engagement for myself. Like, so it was a project that helped me kind of define a way of working, so like an ideology to how to work. And I mean, I've been doing different kind of relational projects before that looks differently, but there is almost always they emerge from a direct relation to a place or to a from a material. And so
And I don't call that architherapy then for me, but still there is like, I have built up a methodology of working that I felt very much was like formed during this process, since it was so long and since there was so much time to reflect.
If I continue,
Mm-hmm.
is it possible to say that the space itself needs some kind of healing? Was the space your client, let's say?
I don't. I mean, it wasn't this idea of like we found this broken building.
Because it wasn't the easiest one, you know.
No.
What was laying there,
Mm.
that was empty, and then you found somehow that
I-
extremely specific space.
I think. I mean, so it was also a building chosen by my two collaborators, but I mean, if I would like then say how I see it, like or like.
How I interpret their kind of engagement with it was almost like that it was like searching to heal a relationship to the society and using the building as kind of a tool almost. So, because they also had this idea of like people coming inside the building would see that something old or ugly from the outside could be beautiful inside. So it was more like using the building as a message for the society around them or for people that would visit the building. Like, I mean, but I mean, it was also very kind of, there were all these different, like also with your question about like the driving force or something like that. I mean, there was all these kind of fascinating elements, part of, I mean, this relationship to the clinic, also this being a building for the dead. There was this kind of, that was, I think was interesting that there had, and that there was this kind of tension of like, is it okay? Is it strange doing this or? And it was also,
I mean, there was a lot of people that then lived in this area that
came by, and because it was going on for so long, so they had seen it, and suddenly they like took the chance and came inside, because it was also then, you know, this clinic and this building had, like, everybody knew about them in the surroundings, so everybody had a relationship to it also and was curious to see what was going on.
Yes.
Thank you. It was like a very powerful lecture, and then it kind of bothered me a bit.
Okay.
And then I thought, because it's very personal, everything goes through you.
Yeah.
So it's a bit similar to Silja's question as well. So I'm very inspired, but so what do I do? You know, I would like to do something similar here, but I'm not you.
No.
And I can't call you. You know, come here, do the same thing here.
But I think, I mean, for me, this is, I mean, now it feels very, I mean, it's interesting that you say this, because I know from the beginning of this project, so this project ended 2018, and I've been holding some presentations. And from the beginning, I felt like I don't know how to talk about this, because I feel like it becomes stronger as a storytelling, or as like coming from my perspective and things that happen.
But at the same time, I don't know then how inviting I am, or how, you know, like how much, if it becomes, but I decided, I mean, I have tried to kind of frame it as it's the making of, you know, a strategy and ideology and approach to building, and this is my engagement with it. And I mean, I think it concerns bits and pieces that you can take from it. Like, you can take the building technique, or you can take the approach of gathering materials, so you can, you know, but I don't think, I mean, me, myself, I wouldn't like to do the same project one more time. I mean, I think it's more about like developing an approach to making that, then this is about like starting from the place, or starting from a site and then forming it through relations. And it is my way of working. And I think it's even nicer if you do something else, and then I can be inspired by that. And then we like have this really big variety and ways of engaging in building. I mean, I think that is very much lacking. Like, there is, I mean, I think architecture can really be like explored and expanded and explored. How can we, in different ways, engaged in it?
You mentioned that you're writing your PhD as well. Do you like kind of dive into more theoretical aspects and inspirations and references as well?
Yes, then I refer a lot to I mean, a lot of like post-humanist feminist thinkers like Donna Haraway and Maria Puig Bellacasa writing about like care ethics and how to build care through making process. But I always feel like when I present it, I feel like almost like this is still something that I tap on top, or that it becomes, sometimes I combine them when presenting, but I also, I mean, I have also kind of been very provoked sometimes being in research environment that there is such a low, there can be a very low kind of seeing on like practice that is like, yeah, you have done this project, but where is the theory? But for me, it's really a lot of like theory building happening through practice, and there is a lot of knowledge and a lot of knowledge like emerging. And I really wanted to kind of bring that to the focus. And then I think this kind of referencing and this way of discussing works better in like text or essay, or for me, like as for my way of like, then I can like, you know, write in another way, and then I can refer and discuss what they were saying and then going back. But I find it harder to do in a presentation. But I don't know, I mean, maybe I just feel like it's really boring to sit and listen to somebody that is referencing too much. Maybe it's not.
Thank you for the lecture. I really enjoyed how you acknowledged all the very small details during the process. But I was thinking, at what point in the process did you realize that this is going to be a PhD project? And when you did that influence your relationship to it? Did it make you more like self-conscious, took away some innocence, or not?
Yeah, I mean,
the thing is that I had just started a practice-based PhD that was having the topic of architecture and health when I found this project. So it was like I just had started, and then I was like, what should I do? How can I find a way of discussing this in practice? And then, as I said, I got to know about these two people, and I contacted them, and I also asked if they were interested in being part of it
as a PhD.
So you knew from the start,
yeah.
And it wasn't an afterthought.
No,
okay.
But I mean, there were a lot of things that I didn't know, and for sure it's been, I mean, it's also why it's taken longer
time. It's because I also kind of really felt that I had to work with myself, not because in a way, I don't know if I want to say this, but in a way it's a very kind of childish and naive approach, like allowing all these things to happen. And I felt very kind of, showing somebody playing piano in the construction site, and I didn't really know how to kind of present this as research from the beginning, because, there was this vague idea of architherapy, but this is also something that has been, cleaned out and that I bring forward. There was a lot of other things also happening, as always when you kind of present something that has happened, you have taken a lot of other stuff away. But it's really been a challenging to dare to be so kind of open and knowing that it will also be kind of, you will sit in a seminar somewhere and discuss it up against like theory and how this goes together.
Thank you, Erika. Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.